everyone, my name is Natalie. I hope everyone who celebrated Christmas had a lovely time and that you continue to enjoy your holiday for the upcoming few days of the year and of the beginning of January. Today I wanted to wrap up my Curious Adventure challenge. Curious Adventure, just briefly, is a year-long challenge, 12 prompts/challenges to broaden my horizons and to challenge myself in reading nonfiction books. So I've done previous updates on what I've been reading for the various challenges, and today I'm going to wrap up the challenge by talking about the books that I've read for the last few challenges of Curious Adventure. So a lot of these books I've already talked about at some length before and possibly written reviews for a few of them, so I will link all of that below if so. So the first challenge I'll talk about is the one to read a nonfiction book about a craft or an activity and then try to do that thing. So it's a combination of a reading experience and a real life experience. And the one that I decided to choose for this is The Violin Maker by John Marchese. So this year I actually took up violin lessons in the beginning of the year before the pandemic hit us. Violin is something I've been wanting to learn for such a long time, several years. I've been wanting to learn, and this year I finally got around to doing that. I'm still very much on a beginner level because I only took a few lessons in the beginning of the year, and then after that I've just been practicing on my own. But this one isn't necessarily about the violin playing, but it's about the building of the instrument and all of the craftsmanship that goes into creating these instruments, in particular the sort of the expensive side of the spectrum of instruments of violins. And it's also talking about some of the reasons that the author was so interested in the sound that this magical box creates. I think especially because I started taking lessons this year, there were a few things related to the anatomy of the instrument and some of the experiences as a player that I think I could relate to in a way I probably wouldn't have if I read this before this year. So I'm really glad that I waited until I had already sort of started my violin journey. The next challenge I'll talk about is time travel. Basically choose a time period that you are interested in and read something about it. And so I decided to go with The Adventures of Maud West by Susannah Stapleton. This is all about a real lady detective working particularly in the 20s and 30s, and I'm thinking mostly about the 30s because that seems to have been her heyday. And I find that in general the sort of interwar years very interesting. There's so much contrast and sort of duality of the nature of that time when a lot of things were still unstable and uncertain, but also there was this wish to celebrate after the First World War. And I think that time period also ended up being a really important time for women and gaining a lot of rights that they didn't have previously. So I think that particularly shows in this book that is talking about Maud West being a lady detective and actually running a detective agency and having a lot of other people working under her. And she's a businesswoman and really good at what she does. And smart as well. Like she has created a brand around herself, and that is part of what Stapleton is trying to sort of read through her stories and try to figure out how much of that is actually true and how much of it is Maud West doing her own marketing. You see some of the sort of suffragette movement beginnings and some of the ways that shaped everyday women's lives and the ability for specific things in their lives and things related to the law as well, because of course she worked with crime related issues. There's things related to the laws around marriage and women's ability to move around freely and make decisions in their own lives. So it's a really interesting time period, and this book definitely gives you sort of a portrait of the time as well as a portrait of a really interesting woman of history. The next challenge I wanted to talk about is to read a nonfiction and fiction pairing. The one that I wanted to specifically highlight here is the one that is probably the most meaningful to me of this year, and that is The Overstory by Richard Powers. And Entangled Life by Merlin Sheldrake. So these books both talk about trees and forests and fungi and the networks underneath the ground. First, let's just briefly talk about this one. So this is a book talking about the environment, environmental changes and climate change, as well as activism from a particular group of individuals trying to provoke change and to fight against deforestation is sort of the gist of the book. It's sort of centrally talking about networks and connectivity, both in terms of this in nature but also in human relationships. And so this theme is very much central to Entangled Life as well, where Merlin Sheldrake talks in part about the partnerships and symbiosis that fungi have with trees, with plants, with other fungi, and even sometimes with animals, and what kind of effects that has. It's sort of I think the biggest theme that he goes into in this one, even though he's talking about several other things related to fungi. That's the thing that I think in a lot of ways make fungi so relevant to read about and to learn about, is the way that they partner up with other life forms. And it's such a fascinating topic, and I think reading this one together with the Richard Powers book is probably it's such an enriching experience. I read them a few months apart, but I feel like a lot of the things that I took away from the Overstory were things that I continued to think about as I was reading this one. The next challenge I wanted to talk about is to read a book that allows you to self-reflect. And so I chose The Stopping Places by Damien Labaz for this one. So this is a memoir where Labaz himself is trying to connect with his roots, with his heritage as a traveler or as a Romani, and he is contemplating what this heritage means to him, what it means to, as part of his identity. And it's this identity search that that I so strongly related to and connected with. The books this year in general that have made me reflect on myself the most is the books that come from a biracial or mixed identity sort of perspective. A lot of the book is him thinking about sort of the claiming of his identity as a traveler and being unsure if he is allowed this sort of claiming, and how it also connects with language and not knowing the language being a barrier for his identity claiming. There's a lot of the things, sort of the baggage around identity that I think I particularly related to, and it's something that I've been thinking about a lot this year. Because it's part of my own self that I haven't thought about for many years, how you fit into both cultures or both identities at the same time, how you stand or how you relate to both sides, and how language and linguistics fits into that. I think because it's such a central thing for me, I think that is also one of the reasons I have always been so drawn to linguistics, is probably because of the way that it gives you access to so many things and how it's related to the claiming of and making something your own. The last challenge I wanted to talk about is to read a nonfiction book that somehow relates to childhood or makes you nostalgic. So I decided to choose a book that isn't related to my childhood but is definitely centered around childhood as a theme, and that is On Chapel Sands, My Mother and Other Missing Persons by Laura Cumming. So this book is talking about Laura Cumming's mother who disappeared or was kidnapped for a few days when she was a child. And so it's talking about the disappearance and the kidnapping itself, and the mystery around it, because it was sort of silenced and the mother herself didn't know what had happened until many, many years later. Laura Cumming is digging into her family history, and this is sort of the process of that and the results, what she found about her own mother, about her mother's parents, about about the memories that have been passed down in generations, and some of the memories that have been actively silenced or repressed, some of the things that has been sort of censored in the family stories. I found it such an interesting experiment to follow her along on, and I think it's not like she always has the answer to things. A lot of the time she is speculating on what could have happened or what people thought, what they felt, because there isn't always documentation for things of the stories that she's curious about. And I think for that reason it's more about how we look back on history, sort of create these clear narratives of our childhoods, and everything is very orderly because we sort of create our own origin stories. And I think she's trying to create her mother's, and it's an interesting experiment, as I said, to follow along on, even though the results she comes to in the end might not necessarily be the most reliable. And that isn't really important either, because memory isn't necessarily very reliable. So that's the book I read for the childhood related prompt. So those are all of the books I wanted to talk about in my last check-in for Curious Adventure. If you have read any of these books, I would love to hear what you thought of them. If you've done Curious Adventure this year, I would love to know how that went for you, if you managed to finish it before the end of this year, or if it didn't go so well. That would be interesting to hear as well. As I said, this is my wrap-up for Curious Adventure, so there won't be another one next year, but of course, one of the things that I will be doing next year is Invisible Cities. So I hope that if that sounds like something you're interested in, you will be joining us in that project next year. And I will leave a link to the announcement in the cards and in the description below if you're interested in more information about Invisible Cities. So that's all I wanted to say today. I hope you are doing well and you're taking care of yourselves and you are enjoying lots of food and nice calm moments in this post-Christmas holiday season period of the year, and that is probably one of my favorite times of the year, to be honest. After my birthday has passed, my birthday is on Boxing Day, so after Boxing Day has passed, it's very calm until New Year's, and it's probably my favorite time of the entire year. So I hope you are enjoying this time as well, and I will talk to you soon.